an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Abhorsen, chapters 22, 23, 24, and 25. Junction Boxes and Sotherlings, Lirael the Abomination, Mogget's Inscrutable Initiative, and The Ninth Gate. In these chapters, Lirael continues moving through the gates in a way that is distinctly unnerving to me. And then she winds up coming up against Hedge, who is honestly, I don't want to say easy to defeat, but awfully predictable. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Abbey for commissioning this episode. Abbey is in the chat, and it is really funny because right before I started recording, I said I've been freezing my tail off this morning, and without context, her comment in the chat, which is the only comment that just says, "Not your tail," with an exclamation point, is very odd. But yeah, thank you very much to Abbey for commissioning this. I think at this point, it's about 2 more episodes, maybe just 1. Actually, I'm not sure how long these chapters are until this story is wrapped up. So I'm kind of like, oh my God, we're almost at the end now. Like at first I felt like we were almost at the end for the first, for the probably halfway point. And then I feel like we've gotten into this whole other section of the story that has sort of lowered my defenses again and made me feel like, oh no, we've got plenty of time to go. Abby says, in my paperback, there's about 40 pages left. Okay, so just 1 more episode. Woo! So chapter 22, Junction Boxes and Sotherlings. We start off in Nick's POV again. As time goes on, I had said that I was kind of sure Nick was going to die after a point. There was a big part of me that was afraid of that was worried about it happening and wanted to root for him. And then I started to be like, maybe not. Maybe he'll be okay. And then I realized I'm just telling myself that because I want him to be okay. I think he's not going to make it. And now I've gone back the other way again, where now I'm starting to be like, maybe he's going to make it after all. And I'll tell you what, guys. Mogget, I think, is going to be what saves him. Now, Mogget's Inscrutable Initiative, that chapter, can easily be read a couple ways, and I think that's intended. It could be seen as Mogget just being like, listen, buddy, you're part of this effort to get these things together. I have been traveling with these people and made it seem like I was not for those being brought together, but I low-key am after all. Surprise, surprise. I betrayed them. I don't feel that. I feel that Mogget is trying to handle Nick and is aware that the destroyer still has such a toehold in Nick's brain that appealing to him via, well, if we go over here, we'll have a really good view of seeing the hemispheres brought together, buddy. Come on here. No, I promise I'm not taking you away from them. You'll be able to see it right here. Just sit here. See? Really good view, isn't it? Now, don't you like that? That's what I feel like Mogget is doing here. He is just I'm not sure if he's trying to save Nick for Nick's own sake, because he was basically given another chance, right? That's Mogget's, the way he said it, that he fucked up one time. And now he is being given another opportunity to prove himself. I don't know what Nick would have to do with that, unless there is something about keeping different parts of the destroyer separated. Like the fact that the destroyer has a shard inside Nick means that the hemispheres won't actually be complete. Like, this is a question that I have, actually, as far as how this magic works. Nick has a physical piece of one of these hemispheres inside his body. Does that mean that when the hemispheres come together, it will, like, rip out of him in such a way as to kill him? Or does it mean that if Nick is taken to an area where he can be protected in some way by magic, that the hemispheres cannot be completed because that shard is not there and it's being prevented from joining up with the rest of the sphere? I don't know. I just feel like still I trust Mogget. Mogget's a dickhead. Don't get me wrong. Mogget is a mess. But I feel like whatever second chance Mogget has been given, I get the vibe that he takes that pretty seriously. So I guess we will just have to wait and see. So let's see. His Nick is like staggering around and he hears somebody yell, "Nick, what have they done to you?" And there's this kid, Timothy Wallach, and says his face was pale and dirty. His shirt had lost its collar. There was mud all over his shoes and trousers. Crouched down behind the hut, he constantly shook as if he had a fever or was scared out of his mind. Poor Nick tries to like wave and come over, and he can barely even walk. And Tim is saying, "You have to stop him. Whatever he's doing or you're both doing, it's wrong." And Nick, who is still like, he is struggling so hard against this like narrative in his brain about the fact that it's this scientific experiment. He still believes that as he's talking to Timothy. He's like, "But it's just it's an experiment. I'm the one in charge here. Why do I have to stop him?" And Tim tells him, "It's Hedge, obviously. He's in charge, and he killed my workmen, Nick. He pointed at them, and they fell down just like that." And when Tim tells him this, he gets really emotional. He starts crying and is just like, I guess, basically he's in this place where he's like, "I just can't believe this is happening." And reminder, these are not people who like know about magic or believe in magic. So this would be bad enough, knowing that magic is real, to see somebody use it in this way. But when you don't even know this is a possibility, it's so much worse. Let's see. I went back to the hut for a bottle I'd been saving to celebrate completion of the work. I saw it all through the window. "There's something wrong with you, Nick," Tim whispered. "Don't you understand? Those hemispheres are poison. Hedge killed my workmen." And then all of a sudden, Tim like vomits. And Nick is watching him. And it's just kind of like, there is something about this. I know that I'm like not reacting right, because there's like a part of me that feels elated by this. And I know that that's wrong, but I can't seem to like get a clear grip on why that's wrong or connect with my own brain. So Tim tells him we have to warn somebody. And Nick says, "Yes, go, Tim, tell her." And I'm like, "Tell her? Who?" And then right away, Tim is like, "Who?" And it turns out he means Lirael. But, for like, he doesn't give that context to poor Tim. And he yells at him to run before he like kind of loses himself again. And before he can even finish his sentence, this smoke begins pouring out of his mouth. And Tim can see this and is like, "Oh, fuck." And poor Tim gets up and he just fucking sprints. He was whispering to himself, jumbled words spilling out in a frenzy. Corvair capital of 2 million in principal products manufactured banking the attraction between two objects is directly proportional to the product of the day breaks not as in my heart 4,800 and the wind shifts generally in the direction white wild father help me mother Sam help me Lirael. Whoo. There is not a bit of punctuation throughout that. He is just brain breaking, pretty much. Nick drew in 2 more shaky breaths, then experimentally let go of his trouser cuff, and the piece of wind flew inside it. He felt a chill run through his body as he let go, but he still knew who he was and what he must do. So then he starts thinking about the lightning farm and the way that it works, and he has seen blueprints for it. And Tim made it like it was he helped Nick to help design it. So Tim made it according to instructions that he sent, which means there are junction boxes that he can pretty much sabotage. I'm trying to find the spot where right. Okay. So he's running and he's trying to get to these like junction boxes, but he keeps on having these moments of like, okay, I've got it. I have my purpose. I know what to do. I'm going to head out that hemispheres. I need to get the hemispheres. I need to go deal with the hemispheres. He just is constantly being interrupted by this other part of his brain that is absolutely hell-bent on this, pun intended. And every time that he starts to lose his brain and think about the hemispheres, he's clutching at the thing in the cuff of his pant pocket in order to try and bring himself back to himself. And so he starts crawling, and he has so little strength left. This poor kid is like really on the edge of death. He tries to open this door. He reached up and tried to open the metal door that was marked with a vivid yellow lightning bolt and the word danger. The door was locked. Nick shook the handle, but that small act of defiance did nothing but use up his last store of energy. Exhausted, Nick slid back down and sprawled across the doorway. Poor Nick, man. He is really trying. Like, he is making a fucking serious ass effort here. This dude is doing more to resist all of this than most people would in his position. I think most people would just be like, I mean, I'm basically dead. I'm just going to lay down and die. I'm just going to enjoy dying because that seems great to me right now. And he is just pushing himself and pushing himself. And honestly, it makes sense now because like part of me was like, so I took it so personally that somebody so competent and so focused in the beginning of the book would be the one that falls prey to Hedge. Not because smart people don't fall prey or have bad things happen to them, but just character-wise, somebody who has this initiative and this leadership in him being turned into a puppet with no agency whatsoever is really painful. But now, seeing him struggling against this the way that he does, he had to be this guy in order for this to turn out as a win for anybody. If a regular old Joe gets overpowered with this fragment, they are not going to be able to fight back the way that Nick does. He has just got this like presence of mind and this, what's the word I want? This independence of will. You know, just like this stubbornness in him and this clarity to the way that he thinks, that he is uniquely positioned as the ideal person, unfortunately, to be put in this position. And by ideal, I mean for the rest of everyone. Not for him, it's not ideal. But for humanity, it's ideal. Let's see. Abbey says he's being a gigantic hero, and even now he's being competent. He knows what needs to be done to sabotage the lightning farm, even if he isn't capable of doing it. Yeah, exactly. Sam says, right. So we jump to Sam's POV, and he is in the middle of talking to the matriarch about the whole thing with the papers that they have been given that are alleging they are going to be given property. And this is really fucked up, guys. Like, whoa. And he is given the paper in order to inspect it. It was headed Land for the Sutherling People. Went on to promise 10 acres of prime farmland for every piece of paper that was presented to the, quote, land office. And there's like all of these titles, the government of resettlement and yada, yada, yada. And Sam is like, dude, this is absolutely not real. And if it were real, why would they send you to Forwin Mill? And he's being translated. And the translator is like, well, that's where the land is. And Sam points in that direction and is like, do you fucking see what's going on over there? Hello? You will be killed if you go there. This is solving a problem for them. They don't want you because you are immigrants and you are not us. You are not, part of our community. We don't care. And somebody else does want you. Perfect situation. They get rid of their problem, give somebody else what they want, and that person pays them for it. So finally, the matriarch, she looks over and she's like, turns and looks over at the south and the east and the north and realizes that the direction they are heading is the only area where there is like a red sky and lightning and fucking doom, and puts it together and is like, fuck, okay. She asks Sam to promise on his blood that he will give them land like he promised. And he does the blood oath. So Sam makes this blood oath. I really hope that the oath that he made is what he thinks it was, because she's speaking in another language when they press their palms together. And I'm just like, fingers crossed she didn't like just fuck you up, dude. Like, I hope not. I don't get the impression she has a reason to, but you don't exactly know what she said. And there feels like there's something a little bit magical going on there, but it might just be, ritualistic and not actually magical. So he tells them to go back behind the running water. And for a minute, they kind of argue with him. He has to just run, finally, because he does not have time to stand here and fucking convince them. And they are standing there, and the matriarch looks at the paper and then rips it up, throws it on the ground, and spits on it. And everybody else begins to do the same thing. And it's a pretty good moment, actually, because I was a little bit concerned Sam wouldn't be able to convince them, and that there would be some that believed Sam and stayed behind, but that there would be others who would fall right into Hedge's hands. So the fact that it seems everybody is taking her lead on this is very encouraging, and it made me feel a lot better. So Sam is running, and he comes across, it says, 2 more soldiers were standing over a young man with their bayonets to his throat. The youth was lying still on the ground and shrieking. His clothes and skin were blackened, and he had lost most of his hair, but he was not a dead hand. And Major Green is yelling at him what's happening over there, and we find out that this is poor Timothy that Nicholas was just talking to. And I don't know what happened to him. Let's see. I saw Kronta struck directly by lightning. His head was on fire, but he didn't stop. Let's see. Nick says he'll try, but yeah. So he explains what he's trying to do, and that Nick is still alive, and they're going, that he's going to help. But I don't know what happened to poor Nick. Did he get hit by lightning himself? Because that's what it looks like. He's all blackened and lost a bunch of his hair has burned off. But it seems like with the bayonets at his throat, that the soldiers thought maybe he was undead and used a weapon on him, thinking that and then it turns out that he's actually just like a live, regular person. So I'm curious about exactly what happened to Nick there. And he describes to Sam about how this white smoke came out of Nick's throat. And Sam is just like, motherfucker. And it says, he knew from Lirael that the white smoke was the sign of the destroyer taking control. Any faint hope he'd had that Nick might escape was dashed. His friend was lost. I don't agree, Sam. Just because it's still there, it doesn't mean that there's no hope at all. And I'm side-eyeing you a little bit. for this bit of despair. Come on, guy. You don't know. It's not over till it's over, baby. Like, come on. So Tim is explaining about the circuit breakers. I don't know how many circuits are needed, yada, 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 like trying to explain to them what he thinks Nick is up to. And all of a sudden, Sam feels this tingle going up the back of his neck and this cold sensation. And his head snaps up and he sees that the dead are coming. They're like almost on them. And let's see. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is my favorite. I love this. He jumped up on a rock, already reaching into the charter to prepare destructive spells. He was surprised by how easy it was. The wind was still blowing from the west, and it should have been harder this far from the wall, but he could feel the charter strongly, almost as clear and present as it was in the Old Kingdom, though it was somehow inside him as much as it was on the outside. I do not know what this means. I wonder why. So he readies a spell, and he looks back to just double check that Lirael's okay, and she is covered in frost on the ground, surrounded by soldiers. But he can't find Mogget. And he's like, what the fuck is going on? Where is that little fuck? We find out a little bit later. Let's go to chapter 23, where Lirael is still going through all the gates. So, gate 5 is a reverse waterfall, a water climb. Lirael and the dogs stared up from the end of the path, their stomachs crowding their throats. It was very disorienting to see water rising where it should fall, though fortunately it blurred into gray fuzziness before it went too far up. Even so, Lirael had the unpleasant feeling that she was no longer subject to normal gravity and might fall upward too. This feeling was fueled by the knowledge that this was actually what was going to happen when she spoke the free magic spell to cross the 5th gate. There was no path or stair here. The spell simply made sure the water climb didn't take you too far. So she speaks the words and she holds on to the dog's collar. And for a minute, it doesn't feel like the spell works, and she's almost about to say it a second time. And then all of a sudden, this little tentacle of water wraps around the two of them, but doesn't quite touch them, and then sort of lifts them up as if it's I'm trying to think of a comparison to make here, but I can't think of anything that comes close. It's like a little elevator that encases you. So finally it tosses them, and Lirael blinked as she hurtled into what her common sense told her should be a cliff, but the back of the water climb no more followed common sense than the water climb acknowledged gravity. Somehow, it had pushed them through to the next precinct, the 6th, a place where the river became a shallow pool and there was no current at all, but there were lots and lots of dead. So this is a really fun moment because Lirael gets to use some of her book learning. And she can feel all of these dead around her, and there are a few of them that are greater dead, and they are serious business. A lot of the dead are actually not even trying to get back to life. They are just sort of, I don't want to say inert, because that's not exactly right, but it seems like they're almost apathetic. Those that saw this great spark of life in Lirael, and they hungered for it. Other necromancers had assuaged their hunger in the past and helped them back from the brink of the 9th gate, willingly or not. This one was younger, and should thus be easy prey. So she sees them, and they are starting to come for her. And it's interesting because we just keep on dipping into their perspective. So the Book of the Dead advised her on how to deal with this. And these greater dead are apparently not familiar with this method, because she pulls out the bell Sereneth and uses it, but does not direct her will to them. And they think that this is a mistake on her part. They think that she is incompetent and she just really fucked up focusing on all of these other dead that are not a threat to her at all. And in fact, what she has done is turn those, the many dead, into her weapons. So they begin to come at her. And at first they don't even realize that there's all these other dead gripping at them, grabbing their legs, trying to keep them from moving forward. And then as it continues, they really start to get tripped up. And all of a sudden they realize what's going on. And they start to just scream with anger. Lirael gained the creature's full attention when a new bell rang, replacing Sereneth's strident commands with an excitable march. This bell was Kibbeth, close by the thing's head, sounded with a dreadful tone specifically for its hearing, a tune that it couldn't ignore even after the bell had stopped. "Lirael the abomination," commanded Lirael. "Your time has come. The 9th gate calls, and you must go beyond it." Lirael screamed as Lirael spoke, a scream that carried the anguish of 1,000 years. It knew that voice, for Lirael had made the long trek into life twice in the last millennium, only to be forced back into death by others with that same cold tone. Always it had managed to stop itself being carried through the ultimate gate, and now Lirael would never walk under the sun again, never drink the sweet life of the unsuspecting living. It was too close to the 9th gate, and the compulsion was strong. Drubas and Sonir heard the bell, the scream, and the voice, and knew that this was no foolish necromancer. It was the Abhorsen. A new one, for they knew the old, and would have run from her. The sword was different too, but they would remember it in future. I like that little detail a lot, that they're just like, "Ah, shit. We done fucked up, but we won't do this again. We won't make this as a mistake a second time." So let's see. She didn't follow because she didn't want to be too close to it when it passed the 6th gate, in case the sudden current took her too. And the dog asks if she can round them up, and Lirael's like, "Absolutely not. I was able to surprise this one, but they are like ready for you, and they will be way too dangerous, and we don't have time for this." So she manages, like, there's a sudden increase in the current, and this is a really interesting, like, it's something that happens without a lot of warning. Unlike the other precincts, the gate out of the 6th precinct wasn't in any particular place. It would open randomly from time to time, which was a danger. Or it could be opened anywhere a certain distance away from the 5th gate. What kind of fucking bullshit setup is this? What the fuck? Oh, it just goes, it just opens anywhere. I don't know, you just kind of wander around, figure it out. Really? Are we doing this? Fuck, I hate it so much. She recited the spell, wetting her lips between the phrases to try to ease the blistering heat of the free magic. Oof, rough. As the spell built, the water drained away in a circle about 10 feet wide around and under Lirael and the dog. When it was dry, the circle began to sink, the water rising around it on all sides. Faster and faster it sank till they seemed to be at the base of a narrow cylinder of dry air bored into 300 feet of water, which is really cool. So I'm going to jump ahead here because I am just doing this, like, I'm going too slow. I have so much left to cover and I'm halfway through my time. They finally managed to get to the 7th precinct. But at this point, the dog is like, fuck, there is somebody behind us. And I'm pretty positive that it's Hedge. So we really need to hurry our asses up. And then we go to 24, Mogget's inscrutable initiative. And poor Nick is just at the end of his strength. He wants to, like, sit up and look at the hemispheres, and he can't even get the strength up to do that. And then he feels something touch his cheek, and he opens his eyes, and there's this little white cat. Now, I think I've mentioned to you guys that the narrator for the audiobook is Tim Curry. The way that he does Mogget's voice is so hilarious to me. This line, he says, "Go away, cat, you'll get struck by lightning." And Mogget replies, "I doubt it. Besides, I've decided to take you with me, unfortunately. Can you walk?" I'm just going to read this in the style of Tim Curry. "I doubt it. Besides, I've decided to take you with me. Unfortunately. Can you walk?" What? I cannot. Like, whenever it's Mogget's time to talk, Tim Curry just is like, I don't know what he, like, it's so languid as to almost be like, is that English for a second there? "The destroyer is distracted, as is Hedge. If that's the best you can do, I suppose I'll have to carry you," said the cat. Like, this fucking, I mean, it is just so funny, guys. I could barely handle it. So Mogget stands up and he shapeshifts. And there is a tiny little dwarf man standing there. And Nick notices that he has a red belt and he has a white robe with silver keys all along the cuffs of the sleeves. "Now," said Mogget cautiously. But really it would be, "Now," said Mogget cautiously. He could sense the fragment of the destroyer inside Nick, and even with the greater part intent on its joining, he knew he had to be careful, but trickery might serve where strength would not. "I'm going to pick you up, and we're going to go and find a really good place where we can watch the hemispheres join." I'm not kidding, guys. That's exactly what he sounds like. And Nick, you know, there's a part of him that's like, this doesn't seem right. And then in a bigger part of him that's like, yeah. Okay, that seems great. I really do need to oversee the work, though. And Mogget has to be like, "Don't worry, the work's done. Everything's fine. We've got it under control." And he's yelling all of a sudden, coming back to himself, "We have to stop it. I can show you. Unscrew the junction boxes." And Mogget is just like, "Look, it is too late for that." And again, this could be read as Mogget being like, "I'm not going to help you stop this because I want this to happen." But I really believe that it's Mogget genuinely being like, "Buddy, I'm sorry. That would have been a good idea 10 minutes ago, but we are not there anymore." The albino began to move faster, though not as fast as he could, in order not to alarm the shard inside Nick. But the young man lay quiet in his arms, one part of his mind content that it was too late to stop the joining, the other part grieving that he had failed. Soon there was visible evidence that Uranus flexed against its bonds. The lightning ceased around the hemispheres themselves and began to move outwards, as if pushed back by some unseen hand. Instead of a concentrated series of strikes in and around the railway cars, the lightning began to hit more and more of the lightning rods that dotted the hillside. There was also more lightning coming down from the storm. Where there had been 9 bolts every minute in a small area around the hemispheres, now there were 90 across the hillside, then several hundred, as the storm above roiled and thundered. Within a few minutes there was no lightning at all in the center of the storm, but down below the hemispheres glowed with a newfound power, and every time Mogget glanced back he could see dark shadows writhing deep inside the silver metal. In each hemisphere, the shadows moved to darken the side closest to the other, raging against the repulsion that still kept them apart. Inside Nick's heart, a small sliver of metal quivered, feeling the attraction of its greater whole. For an instant, it moved against the heart wall, as if to burst forth in bloody glory. Guys, I was real fucking worried. But the attractive force was not yet strong enough and was too far away. Instead of erupting out through the flesh and bone, the shard of the destroyer caught the flow out through a bright artery and began to repace the passage it had made almost a year before. What does that mean? I don't like this. I don't like anything to do with this fucking shard actually being a physical thing inside his body. I really just hate it a lot. So we go back to Sam, and they're fighting against all of the dead. And they have only repelled the first round. And there was a dozen of them, I think. But there had only been a half dozen. Oh God. Yeah, no, they are not ready. They're making us keep our distance while they prepare for the main attack, I reckon. He looked back to where Lirael's ice-encrusted body stood between the rocks. The ranks were thinner than before. None had been slain by the dead, but at least a dozen or more of them had simply run away, too scared to stand and fight. The major had reluctantly let them go, muttering something about not being able to shoot them when the whole company shouldn't be there anyway. Fair. Does it count as desertion when you guys are flatly off mission? And Sam, for his part, is just really frustrated because they're too far away to really know what the fuck is going on with the hemispheres and everything. And I just really like Major Green. I just want to say that, Major Green is kind of a low-key MVP of this section of the book, and he is just so reasonable. So there were too many dead rising to blast with charter spells. He hesitated for a moment, then got out the panpipes Lirael had given them and lifted them to his mouth. So Sam here, he manages to use the pipes to a degree, but it's not really enough because this isn't a bell that continues on when you ring it, regardless of how you've moved your, as long as you have it going, that note will continue to chime for about a minute, even though it will grow slower and more faint. But because he has to take the pipe away from his lips and draw breath, every time he does that, it loses control over the dead that it has managed, which is rough. That just does not seem fair. I don't know if there's a way, can you cast a spell on yourself to have breath that lasts longer? Is that something that he could do where he could suddenly not have to breathe and continue to blow on it? I don't know. I will say that I'm proud of Sam for engaging with the dead because we know how he basically had PTSD at the beginning of this book and could not handle reading the Book of the Dead or dealing with anything with the bandolier of bells. And now he's out here using this panpipe, which is a big step. So good for you, dude. So then we go back to chapter 25, the ninth gate. This is the final chapter in this section. She can see Hedge behind them. They are crossing through the 7th precinct at a dead sprint, and there is fire ahead of her that they have to pass through. So she says the spell as they're running in order to turn it into an archway that they can run through. They went through to the 8th precinct, and Lirael had to quickly gasp out another spell to ward off a patch of flame that reared up out of the water toward them. It's such a weird thing. There's all this fire that is coming up out of the water. She felt a tiny muscle above her eye start to twitch uncontrollably, a symptom of nervous fear. Listen, guys, those of you who have come to the live recordings know that I have a facial twitch. You can see it happening right now. Abby knows. It is the worst. It tends to happen more when I'm stressed out, but not necessarily. I'm pretty relaxed right now, and yet it is just going to town. This is the worst, most annoying thing. And to have it happening when you are already so stressed out just really does not seem fair. So finally, let's see. She shouted 2 words to send a long snake of fire twirling into another, the two joining in a combustionary dance. I saw Hedge behind us. I know. When we get to the 8th gate, I'll stay here and stop him while you go on. And Lirael is like, fuck no, absolutely not. So the river at this point, because she's like so busy battling these bits of fire and keeping an eye out for them, tries to yank her off her feet. And she sort of manages to keep herself going down only to the waist by leaning on her sword. But the dog is like 100% in the water already, thinking that Lirael has been sucked under. And she comes back up soaked and it's just like, oh, I thought you went in. My bad. And I just really enjoyed this like little embarrassing moment. So Lirael and the dog sort of argue finally about the dog coming with her. Because the dog wants to stay behind and fight Hedge herself. She like kind of wants to keep Lirael from having to face him at all, which I understand that inkling, but like this is something that Lirael has to deal with herself. And finally, Lirael says, whatever happens, I want us to be together, dog. The disreputable dog looked up at her with a troubled eye, but didn't speak. I am so concerned. Is this dog her mom? Like, is it? Is this, like, what's up with this dog, guys? What is going on? Like, there's something, I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading into things too much. So they step into the 8th gate, and there is like a complete, like, nothingness. She cannot feel her own body. There's no light. There's no sound. She spoke the spell that would take them through this ultimate darkness, through to the 9th and final precinct of death. The 9th precinct was utterly different from all other parts of death. The familiar tug of the river at her knees disappeared as the current faded away. The river now only splashed gently round her ankles, and the water was warm, the terrible chill that prevailed in all other precincts of death left behind. Everywhere else in death always had a closed-in feeling, due to the strange gray light that limited vision. Here was the opposite. There was a sensation of immensity, and Lirael could see for miles and miles across a great flat stretch of sparkling water. For the first time, she could also look up and see more than a gray, depressing blur. There was a sky above her, a night sky so thick with stars that they overlapped and merged to form one unimaginably vast and luminous cloud. There were no distinguishable constellations, no patterns to pick out, just a multitude of stars casting a light as bright as, but softer than, the living world's sun. Which is dope. That sounds awesome. I just really like this, that when you finally get to the last precinct of death, it's not about danger and coldness and trickery. It's about accepting things. It's about letting yourself relax into the fact that you are going to be part of everything in a way. So she feels the stars sort of calling to her, and she gets physically lifted up. And when she looks around, she sees that there are all kinds of dead around her also being lifted up. Some went slowly, and some so fast they were just a blur. Some small part of Lirael's mind warned that she was answering the 9th gate's call. The veil was the final border, the final death from which there could be no return. That same small conscience shrieked about responsibility and Uranus and the disreputable dog and Sam and Nick and the whole world of life. It angrily kicked and screamed against the overwhelming feeling of peace and rest offered by the stars. Not yet, it cried, not yet. That cry was answered, though not by any voice. The stars suddenly retreated, became immeasurably far away. Lirael blinked, shook her head, and fell several feet to splash down next to the dog, who still gazed up at the luminous sky. So the dog sitting there, Lirael is like, why the fuck didn't you do something? I'm out here just floating up in there to like disappear forever. You could have just grabbed my ankle, stop me. What the fuck? And the dog is like, this is not something that I get to stop happening. This is something that you have to stop yourself from doing. Like, it's a whole thing. But I am really glad that you came back. And Lirael starts realizing that there is no Hedge. He hasn't followed them through into this precinct. And she sort of realizes that he might be afraid of this one. And the dog confirms to her, yeah, I'm pretty sure that he's going to be waiting for us when we go back out through the other way. But he's not coming in here. So for a minute, we have a little bit of peace and quiet. So this is when, and guys, I confess, like when the dog is like, shouldn't we do what we came here for? There was a big part of me that was like, what? Do what? What do you mean? Oh, right. We need to find out how to shit. Right. Like, guys, I completely forgot the whole point of Lirael coming in here. I am not going to lie to you. Abbey says, I thought the dog was just wary of going into the 9th precinct in case it turned out to be her time. She's very old after all. I like that. Okay. That's a good explanation. So he will be waiting for us, yada, yada, yada. Okay. So she pricks the point of her finger. Blood dripped and a drop fell, but it flew upward toward the sky instead of down to the river, which is cool. I like that detail. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, was there another book where somebody bleeds in the river of death and it like attracts the attention of creatures because of that blood being life? I feel like that happened one time where it was like, a shark basically. It like drew the attention of things, but I don't totally remember. So she puts her blood on the mirror and it sort of immediately spreads as if it was like dripped into water, and puts it up to one of her eyes so that she can still keep an eye on the rest of the place while she's doing this. We don't get to like really see what she sees. Like, we get a bit of a summary. Lirael saw the swirling lights and the sun fleeing backward somehow through the waters of death, and she felt herself falling faster and faster. She began to think about what she wanted to see, and she says the words that she needs to, and she's like staring at this void. And let's see, nothing stirred upon the baked, parched earth. Nothing grew or lived. The world spun beneath her faster and faster, and Lirael saw it in earlier times, saw how all life had been extinguished. Then she fell through the suns again and saw another void, another single struggling world that would become a desert. 6 times Lirael saw a world destroyed. The 7th time it was her own world she saw. She knew it, though there was no landmark or feature that told her so. She saw the destroyer choose it, but this time others chose it too. This would be the battleground where they would confront the destroyer. This was where sides must be chosen and loyalties decided for all time. The vision Lirael saw then seemed to last for many days and many horrors. But at the same time, through her other eye, she saw the dog pacing backward and forwards, and Lirael knew that little time had passed in death. Finally, she saw enough and could bear to see no more. She shut both eyes, snapped the mirror shut, and slowly sank to her knees, holding the small silver case between her clasped hands. Water lapped around her, but it offered no comfort. So we see the beginning of this, but in terms of everything else she sees, we don't get to see that. And it definitely fucks her up. She says, she finally looks up and is like, we need to fucking go. I didn't get it. I thought I got it. Definitely did not get it. And we need to turn around and get the fuck out of here. She had seen what Oronus could do now, and it was far worse than she had ever imagined. Yeah. Yikes. And she's the only one who knows how to bind it, but she's also acutely aware that she's not totally sure they're going to be able to do it. It's just, this isn't something that's a guarantee. Just because she found out that she can doesn't mean that it's actually possible. So, yikes, I feel like I am really a fan of that kind of ending to a thing. Not ending, because it's not really an ending, but I like the knowledge of just having the information doesn't mean that you have won the battle. And it is a serious situation here that they are... She doesn't know that the Abhorsen, the other Abhorsen, Sabriel and Touchstone are still alive. So she says something about how, like, they needed people of the blood, and those people aren't even around. But, they are. She just doesn't know how many of them. So yeah, there's that bit of information that's pretty fun that she doesn't know that. So she's about to head back, and here comes Hedge. And she, even as she opened her mouth to speak the words, there was a gout of flame, and Hedge lunges through, and his sword cuts at her arm. And she is has Serenith in her hand, but because he gets at her arm, it kind of cuts that off. The armor held, but even so, Lirael's arm beneath was badly bruised for the second time in only a few days. She starts fighting back, and she is just having a bit of a hard time, trying to reach for her bells to sort of handle him. He rings his bell, he had a bell in his hand already, Serenith, but nothing came with the peal of the bell. And he yells, "Sit," and then she realizes that he doesn't use the bell on her. He used the bell on the disreputable dog. And there was a bit of me that was just kind of I'm surprised that worked. And we find out pretty quickly that it did not work. The dog is just pretending it worked to lull him into a false sense of security, which is a really smart move, and plays on his complacency almost. He's just so confident and arrogant that he has this handled. And I really like that he underestimates the dog like this. So at this point, we find out what the deal is with Hedge. And it's basically Hedge is afraid of death. And this thing, Oronus, has told him only the dead walk in the living world to praise Oronus for its work. And what's interesting is that we have seen what Oronus does, and that does not seem to be true. It feels like Oronus has sort of, I think, lied to Hedge and been well, the undead will take over the world. He's basically promising Zombieland. But from what we've seen, there is absolutely fucking nothing on these planets after he's done with them. So Hedge has been sold a bill of goods, my friends. So let's see. And he tries to tell her that the hemispheres are together, that everything is dead. And she's like, bullshit. If it were done, you wouldn't fucking be here dealing with me. And he says something well, I just find you really annoying, and I want to be the one to kill you because it's fun. And I'm just you are so bad at this, dude. Stop it. She's not stupid. She knows. And let's see. Lirael struck at him with all her strength. Hedge laughed, parried, and stepped back and tumbled over the disreputable dog. He dropped his sword and bell at once and clapped his eyes to his hands as he struck the water with the hiss and roar of steam. But he was an instant too late. He saw the stars as he fell, and they called to him. overcoming the weight of spells and power that had kept him in the living world for more than 100 years. Always postponing death, always searching for something that could let him stay forever under the sun. He thought he had found it, serving Uranus, for he cared nothing about anyone else or any other living thing. The destroyer had promised him the reward of eternal life and even greater dominion over the dead. Hedge had done everything he could to earn it. So yeah, this motherfucker just fucking underestimated this dog. The dog just fucking trips him. And then he just sees the stars and he's gone. And I was just like, man, you are a bit of a punk, huh? Actually. Abby says, I love it's tripping over the dog that finally kills him. It's so banal. Exactly. Like, and when I said at the beginning that this is a little predictable, I don't mean in terms of the writing being bad that it's predictable. It's just, of course, Hedge is overcome by, like the fact that death has finally reached him, that all he has ever done is try and flee it. And now he's like unable to do that. And that is just, of course, because he's a little punk again. So the coils of steam wafted away. The river grew quiet. Hedge raised his arms and began his own fall toward the sky. That is pretty wild. I wonder what he looks like now that the fire has gone out, since that like becomes part of like what he looks like, you know? Is there just a dude underneath? But they don't have time to like sit there and be like, haha, we won. They have to fucking rush back, because as much as they don't really believe that everything is a done deal the way that Hedge asserts, they are aware it's heading in that direction, and they just don't have any time to waste. And it says Lirael knew how to bind the destroyer, but she also knew it couldn't be done by just her. Sam would need to be the heir of the wall makers in truth, and not just be entitled to wear their silver trowel on his surcoat. Others of the blood would be needed too, and they just weren't there. And I'm like, yeah, they are. Ha! You don't know, though. Even worse, the binding was only half of what must be done. Even if Lirael and Sam could somehow manage that, there was the breaking, and that would require more courage than Lirael thought she had. And that is the end of the chapter. So what does that mean? So the binding is binding this thing in the sphere again, because it's currently trying to break out, right? The breaking is splitting that sphere in half again, right? I really need them this time to bury those fucking halves a little bit further apart. Can we all just agree that that's just a smart way to handle this, please? Now, as far as her not feeling like she has the courage to do what she needs to do in order to break it, you could interpret that a number of different ways. The way I interpret it is that somebody is going to have to sacrifice themselves in order for this to work out. And I think Lirael believes that she is going to have to sacrifice herself. And I am not excited about it. Now, I'm not excited about it for a number of reasons. One is because Lirael's young and has potential and is smart, and I don't want her to die. But the other is, I feel like if she offers to do this, that somebody else is going to be like, no, sacrifice me instead. And that somebody is going to be fucking Nick. And I really like Nick. Just let him just... Hasn't he sacrificed enough? Honestly, you know? Or maybe she's going to have to sacrifice the disreputable dog, her friend. What about that? I just think in order to break this thing, it's going to require some kind of human/spiritual sacrifice. I expect that to somehow be the thing, but I just don't know what that looks like or who it's going to be. So I'm concerned. Yeah. And I'm also like, as far as all of the dead up top, if Hedge is gone now, do they still have motivation? Like, are they just going to be aimlessly wandering around now without a master to lead them? Like, what exactly happens to them all when they're up top if their leader isn't still around? Does it matter to them or not? I'm just really curious about if things will suddenly be a little easier for Sam to manage, or if it will have no effect whatsoever, which it may not. But I'm very curious. So, yeah, that's about it. Abbey, yeah, they should really do that. I think about burying them a little further apart. Yeah, please. And like, don't bury them either. Like, drop them in the sea. Put them somewhere that it will really be hard to find them again. You know, like, how could they have managed to get these excavated? Were these under 900 like meters of water or miles of water? Let's say that. How deep is the ocean? Is it a mile deep? Is it less? How deep is the deepest part of the ocean? I'm going to Google this. How deep is the ocean? On average, the ocean is 2.3 miles deep. On average. Interesting. So, I feel like that would really have been a preventative measure, you know, if we had just decided to do that. Fingers crossed that they think this through a little bit better this time. Also, I want to know who Chlor is. Who's Chlor? What's her deal? All right. I'm going to wrap. Thank you guys very much for hanging out with me and listening to the episode. Thank you very much to Abbey for commissioning this and hanging out with me and for her commentary. I really appreciate you being here. And I will be seeing you guys again soon with the wrap up on this book, and we'll find out what happens. All right, guys. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.